Hey, everybody, welcome back to Bible. This looks like it's going to be a while. We're going to continue doing this e-learning thing at least to the end of April, according to the governor. So we're going to continue on the same track that we are. If you need any help, just shoot me an email. I'd love to answer questions or help you out in any way that I can. But today we're going to look at the divided kingdom. When we last talked, we saw King Solomon had passed away. And he had, at the end of his life, what we see is that Solomon quickly went into sin of idolatry, right? This has been the ongoing problem of Israel. And I guess you could even call today's lesson a lesson learned, or at least heard, but not learned. The people did not apply anything that they've seen in their past, and they continued chasing idols. So this cost Solomon, and it not only cost Solomon, also costed Rehoboam. Rehoboam is the son of Solomon, and instead of being over all 12 of the tribes, he only gets two of them. Jeroboam, who is no relation to Solomon, he gets 10 of the tribes. So now what we have is a kingdom that has been divided into two different areas. Let's take a look at the map real quick because that's going to be super important going forward. You have Israel that's right here. All of this is Israel even today, but in this time period, the northern kingdom consisted of everything here just north of Jerusalem all the way up. We have modern day Lebanon that's over here. Syria is back over here. Jordan is back in this area today. This is Lake Galilee. This is where Jesus lived right here in Capernaum, towards the end of his life when he lived with Peter. And way back over here, we're going to have Nazareth. So all this northern area is actually where Jesus grew up. But here in this time period, Israel is divided into these two pieces. Now you have Shechem, which is the central place of worship for the northern part of Israel, and in the southern part where Rehoboam is king. So all of this in red is the kingdom of Rehoboam. Now this is Jerusalem. Now remember, we talked about Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem. So where was the place that all Israelites were to go and worship? It was right here in Jerusalem. So Jeroboam did not have any say. He didn't have any control over that. He only had all this land. And even though it's more land, he didn't have Jerusalem right here. And that is going to play a major part in some bad decisions that Jeroboam is going to try to make. He's indeed going to live out this thug life kind of mentality here as we look through the rest of these slides. So let's just go ahead and jump right in and take a look at what's happening here. Jeroboam's first sin as king of Israel, he appeared to be the sin of unbelief. Like God said, if you'll just do what I told you to, remember there were two commandments, walk in my ways, and we've heard this before. If you'll walk in my ways and keep my commandments, I will continue to bless you. I will give you whatever you need so that the country, my kingdom, is going to be set apart. It's going to be a country that follows after me, that doesn't participate in idolatry. And these were the things that were promised. But somewhere along the way, Jeroboam decides that I don't know that I believe that anymore. And there was a sin of unbelief, of not really trusting God on those two things, because he got a little fearful. He got a little jealous because God promised that Jeroboam's kingdom would be established. So that was going to happen. That was from God. But Jeroboam, he feared. So there was this fear, this natural fear that just kind of took place, that he was going to lose it to Rehoboam if the people went to worship at Jerusalem. Now, you remember I told you on that map, it was essential to understand that Shechem was the place of worship in the northern kingdom, and Jerusalem was in the southern. But it didn't matter where Jerusalem was, whether it was in the northern or the southern. That was the central hub of worship for all Jews. So the fear was, if people leave the northern kingdom and they walk down into Jerusalem, and they're in the southern kingdom now when they're in Jerusalem, that they're going to experience things, see things, and they're never going to want to come back up north. They're never going to come back to what we have here, because Jerusalem at this time, remember, it was wealthy. It was very well established. Kind of think New York City versus Moncks Corner, where Moncks Corner would be the northern kingdom and New York City would be the southern kingdom. It's central, it's booming, lots of business, lots of money. And so there was this natural fear that Jeroboam would lose his kingdom to the southern kingdom. So he rejected God, because God told him, if you just do what I said, walk in my ways, keep my commandments, and I'm going to build your kingdom. I'm going to establish that. But Jeroboam didn't believe it with his unbelief, so he rejects God's way. And look at this. Jeroboam makes 2 golden calves. Does that sound familiar? Well, we've talked about this in the book of Exodus. When Moses went up to get the 10 commandments, the people rebelled and they didn't know what to do, so they create these golden calves that they begin to worship, a golden calf. So here we are again, years later, and Jeroboam goes right back to what the Israelites had done before. And he knew this story. He knew what his ancestors had done. And this got him in a lot of trouble. So he makes these 2 golden calves. And not only does he make replicas of the calves that were made in Exodus, now what we see is he has declared these to be Israel's gods. Now, you remember that God's whole point in a kingdom was that they could be set apart and that he could make a kingdom that would honor God and would put God on the pedestal. But instead, what we see here is that's not at all what has happened. In the northern part of the kingdom, now in the southern part, under Rehoboam, they're still worshiping God right in this moment. But Jeroboam has now declared these golden calves to be Israel's gods. And for convenience, he places one of these in Bethel, and he places the other one in a place called Dan. Bethel would be located in the bottom portion of the northern kingdom, and Dan was at the very far tip of the northern kingdom. Today, you can go to Dan. I'll show you a photo on the next slide here. But I've actually been to Dan, and I've been to the place where these golden calves sat and were worshipped, and it's a really eerie place once you think about it. And it actually is on the border, just about 100 yards from this place that the golden calves were. You can walk up this hill and stand there, and you will overlook the country of Lebanon. So their religion is now false. They're now worshiping golden calves. That's now been declared as Israel's gods in the northern kingdom. And this is gonna bring a lot of problems for Jeroboam, because again, he's worshiping these false gods. Now, once you sin, there's kind of a downfall. So he makes these golden calves the gods. So what happens next? Well, he comes in and he quickly appoints priests from among the lowest of the people who were not Levites. Now, do you remember who were supposed to be the priest? The priests were set out with the tribes that the tribe of Levi were the ones that would be the priest. That is not what Jeroboam does here. He does not go after the Levites. So you talk about rebellion. He has completely rebelled away from all the things that he knew. He's no longer God of Israel. It's now the golden calves of Israel, and it's no longer Levites as the priests. The Levites have nothing to do with this, even though they didn't have a very good track record either for a while, if you remember when we talked about them. But he goes to the lowest of the lowest people. Those are the ones that could be controlled and paid off to do the things that he needed them to do. So here we are. He appoints these priests from among the lowest of the people, and they were not even Levites. So Jeroboam would offer sacrifices among these altars that he had established, and he led Israel to sin. So he was sacrificing, and this is a replica of what the golden calf would have looked like. Remember, there's 2 of them, and this is what they worshiped. I don't understand why they picked the golden calf. I'll need to do some more research on that. I'm sure there's a really good reason of why they picked that. But this is what it would have looked like. Now, to the left here, this is actually in Dan. So when we were back there in December of 2019, this was one. You can see the altar that is built here. And this metal framing, it was not there, actually. It's just a replica piece to show us how big this altar would have been. And there are the 4 corners that they would have wiped the blood of the animal on. There would have been a big ramp that came up here that they would have drugged the animal on, and they would have done the sacrificing right here on top, whether it was a burnt offering or whatever it may have been. And I was telling you that Dan is the tribe of Dan stayed in this area, which was so close to Lebanon. And if you were to walk right up this little hill right here, it drops off, and that is a completely different country from Israel. So this is a place where they worship. This, when we're reading here in the scripture of Jeroboam setting up these altars, this is literally one of the places that he set up this altar at the furthest tip for convenience, so people would not have to walk to Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem would have been about a 7-day walk from Lake Galilee area. So this was a long walk. And so he assumed that by helping them to be able to walk closer, that they would come here to Dan and then convince them to worship these golden calves. And it became the new popular hot thing to do in Israel. But it gets him in a lot of trouble. They just never, ever learn their lesson on following these false idols. Okay, that's what we have today. That's a lot of stuff packed in just a couple of sentences. It's very complicated. So just open your Google Doc, go in, take your quiz, continue doing them. I'm going to be getting those marked here soon and getting those graded. And until then, continue to wash your hands and stay quarantined. And I will see you on the next video.